All right, so today we are finishing up the senior manual with our final chapter. There is actually one more chapter in the senior manual if you guys ever want to go pursue it and read it, so that you can finish off the whole thing. It's all of the professional development side of things. So it's all the questions about, not questions, but it's all the information about like, hey, here's how to market yourself now that you know how to train seniors. Here's how to keep yourself legally safe, always do a park like little things like that. It's like the legal and advertising chapter. But we're finishing up our final chapter today that's related to, working with this population, which is common medical conditions and how to modify those exercises. So this is going to look very similar to PFT 106, which was our special populations class, which was also all about dealing with common conditions and stuff. And you'll notice I've got kind of just like a master list of what all of these diseases are here. A little bit of information about them and little tiny training adjustments and how to make them and stuff. So we know that almost all seniors will deal with some type of chronic health condition. It's very, very common, about 80%. And so that increases the likelihood of what we call a comorbidity, right? A comorbidity is basically like, one disease that's sort of not necessarily interacting with another one, but present while another disease also might be present. So somebody might have diabetes and osteoporosis, which are very unrelated, but they could suffer from both of those. So it's a comorbidity. But we know that physical activity decreases our risk, right? We know that physical activity has very positive benefits on all of these conditions. And so we are trying to be as physically active as long as we possibly can, so that we don't, have to deal with the detrimental effects here. So learning objectives today. Basically, just to go through all these diseases again, make sure they're all really clear because we're not going to talk about them for quite some time. Understand how they affect the body and outline some basic exercise recommendations. God, hold on. I need a light. I need to sneeze. I need a brighter light. So cardiovascular disease is going to be the big one, right? We know that this is the #1 killer of males and females in the US. It does consist of about 20 different cardiovascular conditions, everything from hypertension to, a blocked artery, valvular disorders, sodium, potassium problems. And so it does account, but the big one that's like the most dangerous is CAD, or coronary artery disease. This is the most common and like I said, lead causer of death in all of our cardiovascular diseases. And what that is it's damage to the walls of your coronary arteries, which are the arteries that supply your heart with blood flow, right? And so we talk about this all the time because it's just such a common, it's such a big deal. But these little arteries here, remember when we talked about blood vessels really briefly, we talked about the fact that like arteries always send blood away from the heart so that they can get to different tissues. Well, your coronary arteries are no different. They're just on a very short sort of circuit there, right? Like it comes right out of the heart and then goes to the tissues that are the heart itself. So it's the pump keeping itself alive because your heart isn't able to absorb blood and oxygen from the inside chambers. It's only able to do it from this outside, sort of vessels here. And so, your heart's trying to give itself oxygen the way that your heart gives all of your other tissues throughout the body oxygen. So coronary artery disease is where, we end up with blockage or damage on those blood vessels. If we start to fill the whole thing, if it starts to get like a fatty streak and then that fatty streak hardens and eventually becomes like a full blockage, blood flow is not going to be able to get in there and we'll see like actual tissue death, which is really dangerous and, obviously very, very bad for us. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about like a heart attack. One of the ways doctors will test to see if you actually had a heart attack is they will actually do like a blood test. And it's like, how would a blood test tell us, that someone had physical damage to a heart? That's like doing a blood test for somebody who has a cut on their arm, right? Like it doesn't make any sense. Well, it actually does when you consider that, like, as your heart starts to die, like those heart cells start to like die off, the cells, which are muscle, it's heart muscle, actually starts leaking into your blood. So when they do a blood test, if they test any of the proteins that are found inside of your heart, and those proteins are just running through your blood, that's how they know that you had a heart attack. And that's why a blood test can actually show that. Because like, you know, it's just like when you get a sunburn really bad and your skin starts to flake, right? Like that's damaged skin that's kind of self-destructing and working its way off your body. Same thing happens in your heart cells. So that's coronary artery disease. We are trying to avoid that as much as possible, right? And so basically fat builds up on the blood vessel walls, which decreases the amount of blood that can travel through those. And then since there's no blood, there's no oxygen delivery and the cells end up suffocating. So our recommendations for this, if we have a client who is dealing with coronary artery disease or, you know, is at risk for it, first off, always obtain a physician's release before exercising. That way you keep yourself legally safe. If something ever does happen, heaven forbid, to your client, and their family decides to, you know, come after you, you're legally protected by saying like, hey, I worked within like their doctor's recommendations, you know, I did everything I was supposed to do. I wasn't negligent, you know. And so it's just one of those, you know, sort of lines of defense that we have. Again, I've never known anybody to actually ever have to deal with this personally, you know, but it is something to kind of pay attention to. You'll always want to have an AED available in case something does happen. That's an automated external defibrillator. You guys will know how to use these. Part of Capstone, Mo's going to help you guys book your CPR AED certifications. So part of your, you know, training as like a trainer is to maintain CPR AED, right? And so you're going to do that every 2 years. So you have to get a new CPR certification every 2 years. That's actually why when you look at like how to recertify, I always tell you guys it's 2.0 CEUs, 2.0 continuing education units. 0.1 of them has to be a new CPR AED. So when you email all your materials to NASM and said like, hey, here's all the continuing education that I did this year, you also have to fax them, well, email them a copy of your CPR card. And when you do that, you're good to go and it renews it all and stuff. But make sure that you always have access to that CPR AED stuff. Also, you're not allowed to work in gyms without it either. So, you know, I personally, my recommendation, guys, is just do it right before you go get your certification. Like book it as similarly close to when you've got to get like certified. And that way, every 2 years, they'll be synced up. So right as your CPR is about to expire, your regular certification is about to expire, you can do all of that in the same week, paperwork and stuff, and just file it every time. And I just think that makes it easier personally. So always have that defibrillator available. And then when it comes to coronary artery disease, you should probably also be testing your client's blood pressure to make sure that they are able to participate in exercise that day. If it's as high as like 180 or over 100, you really don't want to be exercising that day. It's one of those things where it's like, look, blood pressure is just a little bit too high today. It's just not safe to put you at you know, an increased physiologic level. Go ahead and go home, relax, maybe even call your doctor because it is relatively high today. But that's just something that's going to happen sometimes with like a really weak heart and really high blood pressure. And then when you are training your client, like let's say everything's going well and it's time to actually like train them, use the RPE method. Use the RPE to measure your intensity. That way you can continually check in with your client and see how they're feeling and make sure like, hey, how are you feeling? Like, you know, any problems, shortness of breath, chest pain, anything like that. Like, nope, you know, and you're just going to make sure that they're doing, you know, fine. So we've also got stroke to talk about. This was one that we didn't talk too much about actually when we talked about special populations. We actually didn't do much on stroke, but stroke is very similar to a heart attack. They're essentially the same thing. They just happen in different organs. So this is blocked or damaged blood vessels that lead to your brain. So this is where particularly the two arteries that head up to the top of your brain, your carotid artery, right? As it's kind of traveling up, if that gets like, you know, plaque building up on it and blood can't travel up there, your brain cells can't get enough oxygen. And when that happens, that leads to, you know, cell death, just like anything else. And so then, you know, that is going to lead to severe headaches or dizziness. If you ever notice your client exhibiting any of these symptoms, this is where you will want to call 911. So if they get a sudden headache with no cause out of nowhere, pretty severe, dizziness, loss of vision. Now, here's the thing. You've got two sides to your brain, right? And normally a stroke will only affect one side of them. And so like if they get loss of vision in one eye in particular, that is sometimes a sign of a stroke. Also, they'll sometimes have sudden difficulty speaking. They'll have like slurred speech, because what happens is the reason they're losing vision in that eye and the reason they're losing they're slurring their speech is because they're losing muscle control in the muscles of their face on their, let's say, right side or maybe left side. And so that'll start to droop down. If you hear that, again, call 911 immediately. This is not like don't mess around with this. And then weakness, numbness in the face, arms, or on particularly one side of the body out of nowhere. That's stroke. Okay. So definitely, you know, keep an eye out for that, because it'll sometimes, you know, that's something you want to be worried about. Like I said, I've never known anybody to actually have a stroke in the gym. I've seen a couple different seizures in the gym. There was a guy who had like an epileptic seizure. He was just like, you know, he was on the treadmill, and he wasn't one of my clients or anything. He was just like a guy working out at LA Fitness, and he must have just been, I'm assuming, looking at the numbers too much and like the flashing or something. I don't really know what happened, but had a big like seizure and ended up flying off the back of the treadmill. It was breaking some of the drywall. It was a whole thing. But in the end, that guy was fine. But yeah, call 911 whenever you see that kind of stuff. Yeah. So then hypertension, right? And hypertension is its own disease. It's high blood pressure, right? But this is something that you know, is just an increased risk of all kinds of other problems in the body. Like hypertension is part of coronary artery disease. It's part of being worried about a stroke. You know, this is, like I said, it's comorbidities, right? So hypertension is elevated blood pressure, anything above like 140/90. And so our recommendations for this are to engage in like regular endurance training. We know that that has really positive benefits on hypertension in particular. There's something about like high duration exercise that has really positive benefits. So for going for hikes regularly, you know, jogging, you know, training for like races and things like that are a really good way to kind of do this. And so we definitely want to engage in regular endurance training. High repetition exercise, you know, really fits well into that. And our guidelines, always make sure you're measuring your blood pressure and that it's not exceeding like 180/100. Be careful to avoid any isometrics. One of the problems with blood pressure is that, you know, because of these areas of high pressure and these areas of low pressure, they are, you know, going to have areas where blood's going to want to pool. And so we don't want it to do that, which is one of the reasons why we don't want to like over grip. And we don't want to do kinds of things that are going to like isometrically pull blood to like one particular area of the body. So avoid isometrics, avoid super heavy lifting, and avoid holding their breath. No Valsalva maneuvers for clients with hypertension. Again, we talked about it yesterday. I love the Valsalva maneuver. I think it's a super effective technique, but we don't want to do that with our hypertensive clients. One of the good ways to do this, by the way, encourage your client to count their own reps out loud. That is actually a super helpful method for keeping someone from holding their breath. So I will literally do that. I'm like, hey, don't hold your breath. don't hold your breath. All right, do me a favor, count those reps out loud. You know, like eventually it's like, I make them do it. And that way they sort of have to breathe normally, which is really helpful. Then we've got high cholesterol, so dyslipidemia. This is sort of the thing that often leads to high hypertension, right? So this is a client with high cholesterol, right? And when I say high cholesterol, I don't necessarily just mean like high overall cholesterol. I mean like lots of bad cholesterol and not enough good cholesterol. That's really the problem here. Sorry, just trying to get this thing to focus again. No, it always doesn't work. Oh my God. Oh, it drives me nuts. I hate it. I hate it so much. It's so weird. Last time I like went like this and that's what fixed it. Like swiping it with this like cloth. Cool. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I just want it to work so I can continue doing my job. All right. So high cholesterol, which is where a client, you know, there's too much of the low density cholesterol, right? That's our bad cholesterol, LDL, right? So if we look at the two types of cholesterols here, they literally look physically different. They have different like lipoproteins inside of them. And so, I'll pull that up just so I can show like what it looks like in an artery, but oh, come on. Ooh, structure. There we go. All right, so if you look at these two, they look really different, right? This LDL stuff over here, look at all of the like, you know, orange bits, right? Versus like over here, you see like there's a lot of like proteins inside of this one. There's a lot of fats inside this one, right? That's really what we're looking at. So LDL cholesterol, we call it low density cholesterol because it doesn't have as many proteins. It's not dense. It's mostly made up of fat. Whereas high cholesterol or HDL cholesterol, high density lipoproteins, are mostly made up of proteins. And so when we look at that, you know, we know that like the ones that have lots of proteins, that's going to clean out our blood vessel walls, you know. They're actually going to go in there and it's going to knock plaque off of the wall. And so those lipoproteins are very, very, very different in terms of like how they are like overall structured. That's a really good picture. And that's the one I was looking for this whole time. So here's the HDL stuff here, right? Look at how much like of this is protein versus like how much of it is fat. The blue ones are representing actual cholesterols, right? So look at how much blue fat is in this. So, you know, even though this is like smaller, it's more dense. I would argue that it probably like, if you were to actually like pull those two out and weigh them, they would probably weigh like a different amount because one is very, very dense and the other one's very, very light. This is also part of the reason why like, you know, like oil in water like floats to the top. It floats to the top because it's not as dense as like water is. And so water goes to the bottom because it's really dense. Same thing is true of your HDL and LDL cholesterol. You put these into a jar, it would separate. The HDL stuff would float to the bottom and the LDL stuff would float to the top. So that's why this stuff gets stuck on our blood vessels, right? It starts to accumulate here, right? So this is like a normal artery where, yeah, there's some cholesterols in there, but then if we have like a lot of LDL, it starts to build up along the walls, and now we have a narrow artery that cannot, you know, flow blood throughout it. So that's dyslipidemia. So if you do have a client who has high cholesterol, right, our recommendations are to get them exercising, you know, regularly. We're going to recommend constant, like regular exercise, like lots of exercise consistently. That's what's going to be like really helpful here. It almost did it. It tried to focus there for a second. So engaging in about 150 minutes of physical activity per week has been shown to have really positive benefits on cholesterol. So that recommendation is actually by the CDC or the Department of Health or whatever. They all agree with each other. It's about 150 minutes of exercise per week, moderate aerobic activity. That's really not that hard to get. If you walk out of your house and go for a 30-minute walk 5 times a week, it's going to have really positive benefits on your cholesterol and have overall positive benefits on your blood pressure and everything else as well. So we really do appreciate that when we are engaging in that. Now, here's what's really good news, though. If we think that like 150 minutes is pretty easy to get, if you can get 75 minutes of like vigorous intensity activity, that's even better. So 75 minutes, which is half of the time, if it's like vigorous, if you were to go for a 15-minute run 5 times a week, that's 75 minutes a week, that has been shown to lower your cholesterol. So even just like getting yourself up into like that 75% heart rate max range a couple times a week for only 15 minutes at a pop will have really, really, really positive benefits on your heart rate. I'm sorry, guys, this is just driving me insane. I just cannot freaking handle it. Break this thing off if I keep dealing with this.
Just give it a left hook.
I have no idea. All right. We can deal with that, I guess. I'm just gonna go insane over here. I cannot.
It's not bad, but like it's just a little bit blurry. It's not bad.
It's just distracting is all. Like we can't meet him, we're not meeting in person, and I can't even like, we can't even like see right now. So that's it. This is, yeah. It's just all the quarantine irritations are coming back. So that's one of the ways that we can deal with cholesterol. The other way is we want to make sure that we address it through diet. So a diet that is rich in healthy fats, things like unsaturated fats, like healthy oils, olive oils, fish oils, things like that are going to have really positive benefits on our cholesterol. So when we look at like, for instance, like Mediterranean diets, these are diets that are really rich in vegetables and really rich in like omega-3 fatty acids, because there's a lot of like fish and things like this. So you can see like this is sort of your classic Mediterranean diet. It's a lot of like whole grains coming from like beans and things like that. Chia seeds, which are super rich in like fatty acids, avocado, which is really rich in fatty acid, nuts, fish is big, and then lots and lots and lots of like vegetables. That has really, really positive benefits. Here's a different version of this sort of same thing, right? Fish, whole grains, nuts, and then lots and lots and lots of green veggies. That type of diet has been associated with a reduced risk of heart disease because of the fact that it creates so much of the good HDL, high density, clean out your blood vessels, cholesterol. And that's the thing, you should get your cholesterol checked pretty regularly as an adult, because like chronic high cholesterol eventually leads to hypertension. Hypertension can lead to coronary artery disease or stroke. And so that's sort of why we're looking at all those things when it comes to cardiovascular. Any questions on any of that so far, guys?
No.
What are you doing? No, pretty clear.
Cool. All right, so the next thing we've got, looking at diabetes here. Diabetes, which is impaired glucose control. This is where, there's sort of two versions of this, right? People are having trouble controlling their glucose because they either do not have enough insulin or the insulin that they have has stopped working. And it's not that the insulin stopped working. Insulin is just a hormone, you know. It's that the cells have stopped responding to the insulin. So we see about 20% of the population age 60 and over are dealing with diabetes. That's a pretty large amount of the population. And oftentimes it is type 2 diabetes. So type 1 is only about 10% of all cases. And when I say that's 10% of all cases, I don't mean 10% of all senior cases. I mean 10% of all people with diabetes only have type 1. And so what this is where basically it's an autoimmune disorder. Your immune system, for some reason, has started attacking your insulin producing cells inside of your pancreas. So you basically have a bum pancreas. This is sometimes called childhood diabetes because oftentimes that's when people start dealing with it, is in childhood. Type 2 diabetes is, we call it non-insulin dependent diabetes, which is kind of funny because like people still will take insulin synthetically. But what that means is like, look, your pancreas is actually functioning fine, but your cells have become resistant to the insulin that you're creating. And so now it like takes a bigger and bigger amount of insulin to have the same effect that it used to. So basically insulin is not binding to your receptor site. So then what ends up happening is sugar just stays in your blood. Because like insulin's job is to take sugar out of your blood and drive it into your cells, turning that glucose, or turning that blood sugar into these big long chains of glycogen. And then your body is able to break individual little glucose molecules off in order to produce like cellular energy, right? We talked about like glycolysis a little bit yesterday, right? Glycolysis is where you're producing energy in the fluid of the cell, where glucose comes in and ATP comes out and a little bit of lactic acid comes out. So that's one of the reasons why exercise has such a huge positive benefit on diabetes, is because if we can pull sugar out of our blood and use it before like throwing it back out there as like energy, you know, that's going to reduce our overall blood sugar levels and increases our insulin sensitivity, because your body's cells go, oh, I need to use this insulin to process all of this sugar, right? So that's why it has such a huge positive benefit on diabetes there. And so exercise recommendations, we want to try to improve muscle mass. Improved muscle mass can actually decrease the likelihood of that glucose. The reason for that, we know that muscles consume glucose as a fuel source, right? Again, think of glycolysis, right? Glycolysis is all about producing energy in the fluid of your cells. So it takes place in the cytoplasm. You know, if you look at like a cell here, right? This is kind of funny. This is like a cell with a giant, this looks like a nucleus, but that's a mitochondria. But all this like fluid portion in here, glucose goes in and then it gets turned into pyruvate, which is more commonly, you know, known as like lactic acid. That goes into the mitochondria and produces a whole bunch of ATP. But there's a little bit of energy that gets produced here, right? In the cytosol, in the fluid, right? So the more you have, like, if we look at like, you look at like a muscle cell that's like really big, right? Here's like a muscle cell, right? And you can see here's the little myofibrils, right? The little proteins that live inside that cell. Look at how much like fluid there is, right? Like that's a big muscle cell. Big muscle cells means that, hey, we've got all this space to produce ATP in the cytoplasm, right? And so that's great. That's exactly what we're looking for, compared to like a smaller muscle over here. And then if we can also make those rods really big, like in this version, that would also be really beneficial. But that is why increasing muscle mass, when you focus on like building more muscle in your client, it can have really positive impacts on their diabetes. And then our recommendations, so increase muscle mass, and then make sure that your client is not exercising if their glucose levels are anything greater than about 250 milligrams per deciliter. I know that you're not measuring that for your clients, but just encourage your clients to get into the habit of doing a little finger prick before they come into the gym. And that way you can test what their blood sugar levels are before they start exercising. If their blood sugar levels are super, super high and they can't get them within normal ranges before they come to the gym, you don't want to exercise with them, because they're very likely to get the shakes, get really nauseous, you know, and have like a lot of problems. We don't really want to see that. We don't want to have our client pass out on the gym floor. Likewise, you also don't want to make sure that your client isn't like hypoglycemic either. You want to make sure their blood sugar levels aren't too low, because if they're too low, they will also pass out and get the shakes, you know, like a lot of really bad stuff there. So that one's a little bit easier to control. You know, usually most gyms nowadays have like a snack bar of some type. And you can run over and grab like a banana and be like, hey, you know, orange slices or something, and kind of get their blood sugar levels back up. You guys have probably had, you know, I don't know if you're like me, but I've had blood sugar crashes while I'm working out before, you know, where I just get like a little nauseous and I don't feel so great, you know. And that's just like blood sugar kind of tanking into the ground. So we just want to make sure that we're there to help our clients deal with that by having a little bit of food handy nearby. So some simple sugars, fruit, it's a really good example. Sometimes your clients will also even have like glucose tabs, you know. Have you guys ever seen like the shot blocks? Glucose tablets are like things that people with blood sugar can actually, they'll just have, and it's just basically like a little sugar tablet. But one thing, not shopping. One thing you can also get are like, you can get these things called shot blocks. They're by Cliff Bars. And oh, that's so funny. Shot blocks. Yeah, no. But they are these little things right here. And they are basically like little glucose tablets with a little bit of extra like sodium and potassium in there. So there's also like electrolytes. And so you can take these like while you are, you know, running a marathon or, you know, trail running or something like that. And it can be a good source of energy to keep you from cramping up.
What about just like a piece of candy? Is that just too much sugar?
You know what? Honestly, that actually is fine too, if they're having like a blood sugar crash. Candy is very processed sugar. You know, if we're talking about like being health experts, we're trying to go for something a little more natural.
Yeah.
But like yeah, like sour. What's that?
If it's like an emergency, like right there on the spot. All right.
Sour gummy bears or gummy worms or something like that. That could actually be a really good option. Yeah. So here's the thing, make sure you are taking regular breaks with your clients who have diabetes for fluid intake and fluid urination. One of the things that happens with diabetics is that they will actually urinate more frequently because their body is basically trying to pee out some of those extra sugars. So they will often experience like dehydration problems. They'll be really thirsty, but they'll also be peeing all the time. So just make sure you're just testing your client's blood sugars having your client test their blood sugars, and then make sure that they are, you know, regularly hydrating. Ensure like a safe environment while balance training. Remember, a lot of clients who have diabetes will often get nerve damage related to that diabetes. We call that neuropathy, which is damage to the nerves in a particular body part. So this will often lead to like numbness or tingling, oftentimes in the extremities. It's usually in the legs. It can also sometimes happen in the hands. But we just want to make sure that we are keeping an eye on that. And then also watch for their blood pressure. Avoid any exercise that increases blood pressure. No Valsalva maneuvers here either. Anything that involves over gripping. And the reason for that is because, you know, you think about like pressure, right? It's about stuff inside the blood vessels. Well, if there's excessive sugar in there, it's taking up space, therefore the pressure goes up. Next one we've got is COPD. This is chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. This is a condition that affects your lungs function, like asthma, emphysema, chronic bronchitis, things like that. And so when we talk about like COPD, We want to make sure that we're being aware of the fact that our clients are going to experience shortness of breath very, very, very easily. If that's the case, we just want to make sure that we're giving them adequate rest times and not putting them in situations where they're going to get more out of breath. If you're doing exercises like, even crunches, for instance, can kind of force your breath out of your body. We got to be cautious with stuff like that if they have COPD. So maybe a different core exercise will be a little bit more effective, but using the RPE scale to continually check in with your clients is a really good way. Just to like check in with them and be like, hey, how you feeling? That scale of 6 to 20, what was that exercise at? And they're like, I use the 1 to 10 scale with my clients. I usually want my clients somewhere between like a 7 or an 8 in terms of intensity. Whereas like a 10 is like, they're completely tapped out, right? If they're at a 7 or 8, they're in a pretty good spot, so that's ensuring proper breathing patterns and checking in with them is a good way to make sure that they're not going to get out of breath. There's another one where you want to avoid isometrics and high intensity lifts. I will say, if your client has COPD, they can do high intensity. They can do isometrics. You just have to make sure that they are breathing while they are doing it. That's the problem. It says avoid these here because generally people tend to hold their breath when they are doing isometrics. And then we obviously hold our breath when we're doing that sort of natural Valsalva maneuver when we're lifting really heavy. And so, both of those things are not really recommended for COPD. And then also teach your client to be very aware of their posture. Make sure they're rounding their shoulders down and back and breathing into their diaphragm. The more that they can do that, the more likely they are, to sort of get their breath back. It's not happening today. I was like, maybe if I wait enough time, it'll fix itself. We've also got arthritis. Very common in our seniors. Now, there are 2 versions of arthritis that we have to be aware of. There is either way, like by definition, it's damage or deterioration of the structures of the joints. But if you look at like rheumatoid arthritis versus osteoarthritis, it looks like this, okay? So osteoarthritis is sort of just a gradual wear down and damage in the blood vessels, right? Actually not seeing the great picture here. There we go, that's the one I like. So if you look at this, right, you can see here's a normal healthy joint, there's plenty of space in there, and then like the bone is obviously very healthy. But with osteoarthritis, look at how there's extra bone, and then like that bone has a lot, it's like very porous and kind of damaged and chunky looking. That's because like when you slam your bones together, if it causes like damage in the joint, what ends up happening is your body will often create like bone spurs. So bone spurs are, these little like, you can see here, here's a really extreme version of all this, but you can see where like basically your body's immune system was like, oh no, the bone got damaged. And then it went to go repair it, which is exactly what we want to do when we're exercising, right? We're trying to get that to happen in normal, healthy bone. But when it happens inside of our joints, and we get these like little spurs here, that's going to limit how much space you have in the joint to be able to move. And so that's going to cause like a lot of aches and pains if you don't have cartilage, right? And we can wear that cartilage down through really extreme ranges of motion, very high impact exercises, not giving our body enough time to repair and recover in between workouts. All of those things can lead to like, damage in our connective tissue. So that gradual, that's why the other name for osteoarthritis is degenerative joint disease. It's a gradual wear down over time. But we also have rheumatoid arthritis, which is one that is actually an autoimmune disorder where your body starts thickening the cartilage, well, not the cartilage, but the other structures that are in the joint. So it'll actually thicken all of this connective tissue and stuff. And what that ends up doing is that limits the amount of space inside the joint. That is not something that we can necessarily fix through like There we go. Look at that. That's not necessarily something we can fix through exercise, you know, like with osteoarthritis, we can build up the muscles and that can hopefully, you know, keep some of the pressure off of the joints and help with that arthritis. With rheumatoid arthritis, we can also strengthen the muscles, which can help with like general aches and pains. But unfortunately, as like an autoimmune disease, rheumatoid arthritis isn't something that we can cure through disease or cure through exercise training. And you'll even see like sometimes, you know, like the most common way to spot somebody with rheumatoid arthritis is you can see like the joints start to like bulge and sort of deviate from their natural path because there's just not enough space in there. And sometimes you'll even see like externally, you'll see like rashes and flush on the outside of the body there in really extreme cases. Again, this is a, oh gosh, that is a autoimmune disorder. There is medications for that they can take that may or may not have positive benefits. Sometimes with arthritis, a lot of clients will also need to have like joint replacement surgery. Very common amongst the hips, very common in the knees. And basically what they'll do is they'll basically shave off those condyles as they were damaged, and they will attach like metal versions of that which don't have any nerves in them. And so, you know, the metal versions can kind of slide on each other all day and it doesn't cause any aches or pains. So we see a lot of hip surgeries, we see a lot of knee surgeries. You know, it's funny, they used to, the hip surgeries have gotten a lot better, but this is still a recommendation that I think you should teach people because there's so many people who have the old version of hip surgery still around. But it used to be a thing back in the day. If you had a client who had hip surgery, their doctor would tell them this, but this was something we needed to know as well. You shouldn't cross one hip over the other. So that extreme range of motion actually can cause like hip damage in clients who have had hip replacement surgeries. And so we avoid, you know, it says avoid extreme ranges of motion here. That's true of anybody who's post-surgery there, but it used to be like you would basically want to avoid any type of exercise that would have you cross one leg over the other, or even like something like this. And they don't say that anymore. They took that out of the textbook a couple editions ago. And I think it's just because like I was talking to a surgeon friend of mine, and he was saying, well, it's like the surgery has gotten a lot, you know, the replacement has gotten a lot better. We have a lot better like working parts nowadays. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. Hey, look, the freaking camera's finally working. You were doing the minimum job, camera. Good job. So that's osteoarthritis. They don't say that anymore in your book, but I still mention it to people every now and then, just because like you can have a client who, you know, has an old, you know, they got this surgery when they were really young, you know, and like they're still dealing with sort of the old version. But I don't know, it's not in the book anymore, so it's not something you have to have necessarily like memorized. So like I said, when it comes to exercise recommendations, high intensity exercise has been shown to have the most positive effects on bone density. But when I say high intensity, oh, that's osteoporosis. I was like, that's not right. When I say high intensity, I mean like moderate intensity. Like don't go crazy high. Like you don't have to do powerlifting. But when it comes to arthritis, make sure you're doing a proper movement assessment. You know, we want to make sure that we're addressing their aches and pains, which means that they're moving the wrong way, they're going to have more of those aches and pains. You know, remember when we talked about in kinesiology, we talked about increased Q angle, right? What's so wrong with having like the knees cave in, right? Well, it's an increased Q angle. Well, what's wrong with having an increased Q angle? Well, what it ends up doing is it causes the bones to grind on one side. I mean, if you look at this picture right here, right, that's even distribution of space. This is grinding here, this is grinding here. So proper movement assessments are super important in clients who have arthritis, because if they are moving the wrong way, they're going to get those aches and pains. Wow, look at that, that's great. Because they're literally grinding their bones together, right? This is great. This is not so good. And this is not so good either. Making sure we're paying attention to that. Avoid excessive ranges of motion. If you have your client locking out their joints, that's not a very good habit to be in with clients who have arthritis. And here's what sucks about that. Clients who have arthritis, those are the ones who like to lock out their joints. You start to be like, oh, okay, so you've been living a life of, 50, 60 years, and you've been like hyperextending your joints consistently every single day. Starting to paint a picture of why you might be dealing with arthritis, so definitely watch for things like that. Don't keep the joints in a fixed position for extended periods of time. We do want to avoid isometrics with clients who have arthritis, particularly rheumatoid arthritis, because that often causes more inflammation. And then exercising in water can be very, very helpful, because if they're doing aquatic aerobics, that takes all of the pressure off their joints, which just feels really, really, really good. So that's why we have so many senior clients who do so many like aquatic aerobics classes. NASM does not have an aqua aerobics certification, but if you guys ever want to get certified in this, I do actually recommend it. ASFA is a pretty good one. It's pretty cheap. Oh, close that. Oh, why are you here? There we go. So you can get a certification for like it says like a 1 year only certification for $199. This is one of those things where like the company wants you to recertify, but once you have it, you're good to go. You could also get the $600 version, but like, getting the 1 year certification is worth the same amount of CEUs according to NASA as this. So, and then you can still put it on your, resume and say like, hey, I'm aquatic aerobics certified. But if you ever end up in a job where they're like, we want you to teach this regularly and you have to maintain certification, well, then you can just, get whichever version of these you think is going to be best. But basically, you'll go to a workshop. They'll teach you how to do a lot of really cool aqua aerobics exercises with like the little styrofoam dumbbells. Totally worth it. I'm glad that I, got that certification when I did. I used to teach a lot of group exercise pool classes when I worked at like WellFit and stuff. And they were my favorite classes, like people loved it. We'd have, it was basically like a pool party every day, and people would burn a ton of calories. I would have people doing like track workouts in the water. They'd be doing high knees and butt kickers and like, fun bounding and stuff. Bounding was my favorite. I loved having people do bounding underwater. Bounding is already one of my favorite exercises in general. Bounding is basically super exaggerated running where you're jumping from one leg to the next. Actually, I'll pull up this video. This guy, I've seen this video here. This guy is a freaking beast. But yeah, basically it's where you do, oh good, 2 ads. You do this really exaggerated run and it looks kind of goofy, right? Big steps, but it's really good for power. And then he's doing like a single leg bound there as well. But this guy right here, I want to show you this video. This guy looks like he's floating. He's so good at it. But I loved having people do that in the pool because it's really hard to like actually fly through that water, and everybody had a blast doing it. It was just like a really fun, exercise. So that's really good for arthritis. Next one we've got is osteoporosis. This is that low bone density that we talked about, right? Obviously very, very common in our senior clients. Oftentimes fractures are a really common problem here. We're trying to avoid that. We will often see also exaggerated kyphosis here. Remember, kyphosis is where we see that rounding of the upper back. Start to see like this kind of thing right here. Very, very common in our senior clients, right? And what that's causing, as you see, is that's causing like spatial problems in the spinal discs, right? So this is that upper cross syndrome. This is where we really are with a lot of our senior clients, putting a lot of emphasis on trying to get them as upright as possible, because this throws off your center of gravity, which makes it much more likely to fall, and when you fall, it's like all compiling on. It's like, hey, guess what? You're much more likely to fall. Hey, guess what? Also, when you fall, you're much more likely to deal with like a bone fracture. Great, like it's all kind of coming together, which is in the worst way possible. So our exercise recommendations are, to make sure that we get our clients engaging in, we call it high intensity exercise here, but I want you to be aware it isn't necessarily like super high intensity. Like, yes, high intensity exercise has been shown to have the most positive benefits, but with clients who are engaging in exercise with osteoporosis, you don't want them lifting at super maximal intensities where they could also end up like fracturing a bone just by lifting super heavy weight. Warning to you guys, never Google like bone breaks in the gym. It happens every now and then where you'll get usually happens to people who are taking like steroids. They'll like strengthen their muscles. They'll get really strong, but then their connective tissue and bones aren't able to keep up. Ugh, horrifying. You see, that's actually also why I actually don't like mixed grip deadlift personally at maximal intensities. If you're doing like high repetition deadlifting, then I don't mind a mixed grip, but like I do not like that over under grip when my clients are lifting at like super high intensities. For the record, it's very effective. It does work really well, and it makes the deadlift way easier. But my problem with it is the supinated arm, it overstretches that bicep tendon, and you don't want to end up like tearing that. So that's a little side note there for today. But osteoporosis, yes, weight-bearing exercise is going to be key here. We really like stuff that's working directly against gravity. So you can see here, she's using the cable machine. It's actually not bad. There's definitely still some, weight-bearing stuff happening in the hips there, but dumbbells, barbells, yeah, cable machine's not bad. Exercise machines aren't that bad either, like like plate loaded machines and all that kind of stuff, but that in particular has been shown to have the biggest positive benefits on osteoporosis. So we want our client working against gravity. I love resistance bands. I think they are great. I love aqua aerobics. I think it's awesome. I like spinning. I think it's a very good form of cardio. But if I had a client who has osteoporosis, those forms of exercise just haven't been shown to increase bone density as much as others. Do you guys want to see something that is really good for bone density? That is the goofiest looking type of exercise ever. Check this out. Group exercise trampoline. Check this out. So this is a group exercise trampoline class. This is a separate certification. It's like Zumba style thing that you can get. This has also been shown to have really positive benefits on bone density because of all of the it's relatively low impact, but it is kind of jerking against gravity. And I know it kind of looks goofy, but this actually, it's great cardio. It's very fun for a lot of people. And it
looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, right. It can be a really good way to actually improve bone density. What's also really funny about this? So I read an article once, and I need to find it again and reread it because it's been a few years now. But I read an article once about this type of exercise, and it had positive benefits on lymphoma.
What is that?
So lymphoma is a type of cancer. It's like leukemia and lymphoma, right? And it's where you'll basically get like leukemia is basically like an overaccumulation of like white blood cells, right? And cancerous white blood cells. Lymphoma is where you'll oftentimes like your lymphatic system, which is moving water around your body, will often like get cancerous, right? Like that's how I lost my cat. My cat had like lymphoma in his neck. So he had this like big tumor and he had to be put down. And what's absolutely crazy, look at that, it's so goofy looking, is that they think that the impact of like going up and down basically moves fluid so rapidly through your body and like pushes it around in different areas that it actually has like positive benefit. It can be like, you know, something to do if your client has that disease. And I read an article about it one time and I was like, that is fascinating. And I need to like revisit it and look it back up, because like that's a very weird sort of cure for, you know, a disease that we don't have a cure for, you know. Like but yeah, leukemia and lymphoma are two types of cancer. So anyway, that has positive benefits. And then another type of thing that you'll see, and these are, you know, if you ever wanted to like have a group exercise, it's going to be a pretty big investment. But sometimes you'll see like power plate classes where you'll have gyms that have, you know, this little vibrating platform that also has been shown to have very positive benefits on osteoporosis. So you can see she's doing, you know, some exercises here that are modified to sort of incorporate the power plate. But what that does is this is vibrating at a frequency that has been shown to have very positive benefits on bone density. Unfortunately, those machines are muy expensive. They're like 10 grand. But if you ever work, you can get power plate certified if you end up like wanting to work with seniors and stuff like that. So lastly, this is not necessarily a disease, but it would be considered like a comorbidity. We've got general low back pain. So low back pain, any and all conditions of pain or tenderness in the low back. This affects about 80% of adults at some point in their life. So 4 out of 5 adults are going to deal with some type of chronic low back pain, the most common of which is lumbar stenosis. So lumbar stenosis is basically where the lumbar section of the spine ends up narrowing. So you can see here, there's like a very limited space there, and then there's kind of a gapping here and limited space, right? That is lumbar stenosis. And so you'll see this like narrowing of the spinal column, right? And then that causes like a pinching action on those nerves as they're running throughout your spine. This actually runs in my family. I've got a little bit of minor stenosis. My mom had it. My grandpa has it. I said my mom had it. My mom has it. My grandpa has it. Ours is a little bit different. It is actually a narrowing of the canal. So like you can see here, there's supposed to be sort of some space. There's supposed to be a little bit of a gap between where the nerves are running. But sometimes the body will sort of store extra calcium and it will build up those discs a little bit too much, and there will be a little bit too much bone in there. And then that causes like a lack of space, which causes like an aching or numbness in the low back. So when I do not do core exercises the way I'm supposed to, and when I don't like take care of my low back posture, this is very common. And then, like I said, I have a little bit of a low back rounding problem instead of a low back arching problem. What that often causes, well, that's upper back rounding. No, that's upper back rounding as well. But anyway, it basically causes like collapsing in the front of the discs. And so like, you know, it's the same problem as an anterior pelvic tilt, just in reverse, right? So like here's upper back rounding, right? That's going to cause pressure in the front of the discs and gaps in the back of the discs. That's kind of something that runs very commonly in my family. So exercise recommendations, particularly core stabilization exercises have been a proven, very effective way at relieving pain within about 1 week of training. So freaking do it, you know. I show this all the time, and I know I pull this guy up constantly, but there is what's called the Mcgill Big 3. in my opinion, this is a type of exercise that everybody should be doing all of the freaking time. Even if you can start your mornings like this, it's great. But it's basically this physical therapist, Dr. Stuart Mcgill. He came up with these 3 big exercises for spinal stability. I mean, he didn't come up with the exercises, he just kind of like studied them. But these are the 3 best is what he found. And everybody in the industry like agrees with this guy. Like anybody who's like a personal trainer, physical therapist, everybody's obsessed with Stuart Mcgill. Like he's the spine guy. And it's so funny. He looks like, he is, he totally looks like, yeah, he's got like the mustache and stuff. Like he looks like your classic, like, oh yeah, this guy's been in the fitness industry since the beginning, like, but he is all about like spinal stabilization and stuff. And he's the guy. He works with a lot of power lifters. He's a really strong guy himself. He's not like a particularly big dude, but like he is the go-to, like whenever you're having spine problems. And his big thing is this little, they call it a McGill sit-up. And it's where you just basically curl off the ground. So gravity's pulling you back this way, but you have to stabilize your spine and just come up an inch or 2 off the ground. You're just gonna hold there. A side plank, she's doing a modified side plank on her knees. You can also do that all the way on the feet. And then here's the bird dog. And those are the best exercises. Another very famous physical therapist that's out there is Julie Sarman. She is also a physical therapist. She is a little bit more on the side of like she's worked with like a lot of like postnatal women, like women who've like, after pregnancy need to get their core strength back. Her big thing is all about like pelvic floor strength and stuff. But she has a protocol as well that is really good for spinal stabilization and really helping with like keeping your spine nice and healthy. So with senior clients, both of these protocols I think are super, super, super helpful. That's not in your book. That is a personal recommendation that I'm putting in there. But I'm a huge, huge fan of theirs. In fact, there's a lot of famous YouTubers out there as well. Jeremy Ethier, oh my God, Jeremy Ethier, Jeff Nippard, and Aaron Horschig. All of those are kind of famous, like, personal trainers on YouTube. All of them have had Stuart Mcgill on their shows. So he shows up all the time. I'm a big fan. So make sure you recommend, adhering to those recommendations. Avoid excessive range of motion with low back pain. I love the Superman. I love prone cobras. I wouldn't recommend them for clients with really severe low back pain until they can do them properly. I would start with something like a bird dog and then eventually work my way to a prone cobra and then eventually work my way to a Superman if they have that good posture. But always focused on proper alignment, and that can help through like flexibility training as well. So a lot of chronic diseases, but still our clients can absolutely engage in exercise. We just want to make sure that we're paying attention to any of the contraindications related to those. So avoiding like excessive ranges of motion is a contraindication for clients with, low back pain or osteoporosis, foam rolling, being cautious about things like that. And that's it, guys. Pretty gentle compared to yesterday's lesson, and I only went crazy for a good 20 minutes of it. Do you guys have any questions today? Mir, how you feeling? Dion, Thomas?
Good. Thank you.
No questions.
Good. You're just like, no questions, just worried about your mental health.
Actually, no, you said we have a homework today, right?
Yes. So the final piece of homework is up today. Yeah, it'll be 15 questions just like normal. You will notice a lot of the questions are very much like how many reps are appropriate for, this client in this phase of training. So just pay attention to those OPT rules we talked about. Maybe a good idea to have your big chart handy so you can reference that. But yeah, a lot of questions related to that. And then you'll see some of the diseases from today's lesson as well.
And then that big chart it's in our book, right?
Yes. Well, not one big chart, but in your
Yeah.
book, there is a chart for each of the phases. There's a chart for each one. They're all on one big one on that sheet that I made on Canvas. But starting on page, I think it's page 371. 371 is stabilization. 373 is strength endurance. 75 is hypertrophy. 78 is max strength. And then I think it's 81 is power. I think it like skips a page, or 380 or something. But yeah, it's right around there.
Okay, but the one that you did on Canvas, how do I say? Is it like under the assignments? Like easy to find under the assignments, or?
No, you'll find it here. I'll show you. So you go to Canvas and you go to yesterday's lesson, which would be day 7. So you click here and it's this handout right here.
Okay, it's the handout.
You just click the download button and it'll be right there. And
okay,
you'll see all those things.
Thank you.
Yeah. But in your book, it's like, this is one page and then like this section's another page.
Yeah.
So we just assembled them all onto like, what is hopefully easy to read. One page.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Dion, how you feeling?
I'm good.
Cool.
Yeah, hanging in there.
Love that. All right, fellas. Well, wrap up a bit early today, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.
All right, now.
We'll do our review. We'll play a little game tomorrow morning, and in the afternoon it'll be fun.
The game that we're gonna play tomorrow, that's basically our class session, huh?
Yeah. So it'll take quite a while, actually. It's not very fast. But we're gonna go through homework 1, homework 2, homework 3, and homework 4. We're gonna review all 4 of those. And you guys are basically going to answer them as fast as you can against each other. The points don't actually matter. It's not actually competitive, but it's an opportunity for me to see like if there's like a specific question that everyone's struggling on, I can talk about it and kind of break it down. So.
All right, cool.
All right.
All right, now. Have a nice day, guys.